Hey there. Please excuse the poor video quality. I need to get a webcam, and the webcam on my laptop, not exactly the best. I guess I could use one of the wonderful other devices that are lying around, but have you ever tried to upload to YouTube from one of those? Not exactly the easiest. So as a result, I come to you live from my shitty webcam camera. I was moved to do this video because I'm moving to a place in my life where I no longer need to give a shit about what I say. Mostly because I've refined what I need to say into that which serves what I consider to be a higher purpose. I have fully committed to truth, and so because if you're a loudmouth and you're not committed to the truth, then you're kind of an asshole. And so it's really difficult to get over the lies we have to tell ourselves and tell each other every day. How are you? Oh, I'm good. Actually, I'm not doing good, but I don't need you to deal with it. That's kind of what the shift is effectively like. I speak today because yesterday I was handling my little tarot cards. I've been practicing reading the tarot cards. Oh, and he's right there, ready to be talked about. So, there's like 72 cards total, but there is a section of the cards called the Major Arcana, which means like the larger secrets. They kind of talk about the influence of the larger archetypal lessons of our lives and the journeys that our souls go on through and the cycle, like the larger psychological parts of the cycles of life. Like we're going through these all the time. They go from 0 to 21, so 22 cards total, and they represent a journey. And we could pop into any point of these journeys. So last night I was having this pit in my stomach. I'm going through transition, and this card has come up for me sometimes, but it has been rare. But I kept getting the devil, which honestly, you need to look at this mathematically in order to be astounded by it. You draw it once, okay. So you put it back and you draw another one, and you're like, whatever. And you get the impulse to draw another one. You get that one again. You lay it back down, and you get the impulse to draw another. So you kind of get, and I kept on getting like this card, the devil, followed by like another card like the Empress. The interesting piece about this concept is, one, you have to believe that the universe will give you hints if you decide to give it ways to communicate with you. And so that's all a tarot deck is. It's a way for you to sink in with just whatever the patterns of the world are. There's cycles. There's a million times that something like Hitler has happened. There's a million times that a fucking buffoon of a leader has gotten elected. That's not a new type of thing. Like, Donald Trump is not an original idea. He's part of the cycle. So these just kind of acknowledge their cycle. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about what the devil is, and a little bit about death, and what death sort of means in that context. Death isn't really coming up for me, but the main priority right now is to kind of conceptualize the devil. So, number one, there is no such thing as good and evil as a concept. We certainly haven't been mistaken to try to fear things that we've considered to be evil, and we certainly haven't been mistaken to move towards things we've considered to be good. But that is an illness of the mind, to cleave things into good and bad. It is a child-like structure of the world. Everything is this or that, black or white, good or bad. You often see this in personality disorders. We often label this as a symptom splitting. One moment someone's good, one moment someone's bad. And so their good and bad filter is a little mixed up. The interesting part about that is nothing is inherently, there is no such thing as bad and good. There's effects, there's causes and effects. So for example, I work with child abuse. So there are people who take actions that hurt children, and the children are traumatized. I personally don't want there to be trauma. I don't want there to be trauma. I just don't want there to be any trauma that doesn't need to be there. I think that we can learn through wisdom and not through suffering. So one of my values is learning through wisdom and not suffering, and therefore I feel that it's a good idea for me to intervene with people that are causing suffering and perhaps guide them to choose wisdom instead of suffering. See what I mean? Okay. So you can get rid of the concepts of good and bad, but you can still keep the causes and effects. It may not make sense, but sit on that one. And so, from this concept, we have the devil. Now, the devil kind of represents our animal selves. There's a place for our animal selves. He's often related to the god Pan, but he sort of represents the dominion of the physical realm over the spiritual realm, which is kind of like if a bunch of monkeys started running the show. Like, okay, like, it's okay to acknowledge that we have animal instincts, that, we have feelings, and that, we have to respond to what our bodies are telling us. We also have to acknowledge that our bodies are not necessarily the rulers. Our bodies have great wisdom, great attunement, they're in tune with the world, but we're made of more than just our bodies. So the devil is the acknowledgement that right now there are going to be ways in which your physical reality is going to influence how you're making decisions. And there's a little man and a woman, and they got horns, and they are chained very loosely. You'll notice the chains around the neck could probably be just taken off if they decided to. But they have decided to keep the chains on. But they got a big fucking demon behind them, so, they're probably choosing to keep the chains on because they're possibly afraid of retaliation. And so the devil speaks to the fact that ultimately the chains that bind us, they may be difficult to leave because what's holding them is scary, but ultimately you're free to leave and there is a chance to go. And, he can come up upside down, which usually kind of indicates a beautiful thing, actually. But the devil indicates, you're kind of trapped and you kind of chose it. But you didn't know. It usually means you didn't know. So, obviously, being enslaved, being entrapped, not necessarily the best thing that you want to have happen to you. But we all have ways in which you're indentured service. How many of us have jobs? I have a job. It's kind of the closest thing to slavery you can have without slavery because you're willing to give up your life force in order to receive money, in order for you to be able to do these things, and you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Devil usually comes up when our work is becoming slavery, or it's becoming too close to slavery as opposed to a way in which it supports the world is functioning. And I mean, you can take your job at McDonald's and you could turn that into something that nourishes the world and nourishes your life. There's no inherently bad job. There are bad work environments. Every work environment can be bad. Every system of management can be oppressive, and every worker can be self-sacrificing to the point of victimization. And it's tricky when they're all in the same place. Anyway, so I'd invite you to consider devils as a kind of a necessary part of things. There's a level at which you kind of choose to surrender your power because we aren't necessarily individually powerful over anything. But this little dude, he don't come up unless you've kind of gone to shit with it. It's not really the best place to be. Thankfully, shortly after him is the tower. And in the tower, everything falls apart that shouldn't be there. So there's an interesting piece that happens because as the numbers go up, things change. And for example, like the devil's number 15, but number 13 is death. This one comes up for me often because things change a lot. It's actually probably one of the better cards you can have. Death is an important part. How do you know what your life has been if you don't die? How do you know that something has begun if something has not ended? One of the barriers I faced in life is something beginning and me not having let something die. And it's like I've got a zombie life going on. You know, you become a zombie when you live like that. So there's a process of death. And I invite you to reconsider the concept of death as you know. So we often admire the concept of being creative. Would you not agree? Isn't it? Oh my gosh, she's so creative. She creates a lot of things. Okay. Where does she create these things? In which space do her creations occupy? Have you ever heard of the term like a creative block? I have a block to my creation. Maybe there's not space for your creation. Okay, so we have our creations, we nurture them, and they grow. Then they become, well, what they are. At some point, our creations need to go because they're occupying space. The thing that we've become has occupied space that needs to be terminated. And so then that death needs to happen. That space needs to be evacuated. That space needs to be left so something new and wonderful can come into that space. And that's what death is about. So sometimes we die. I assure you something else moves into the space in which we die. We leave workplaces. Something new and wonderful has opportunity to come in. If it's our time to leave, we will invite newness into the space. And hopefully we've had an influence on that which will come into that space. There's a lot to be said about death, and a lot of people fear it. I invite you to live as if you're not afraid that at any point a meteor could come down and smash the shit out of you. Because it could. You could literally die like the next second. Don't ever fucking forget that. You could die any moment. And are you going to let that scare you? Or are you going to let that motivate you to give as many fucks as you'd give if you could die tomorrow? So if you died tomorrow and past you made a bunch of decisions where you were financially running into the ground and you made a shit ton of poor decisions and you're living in suffering, I don't think you'd be really happy in your last moment. So that means that just because you live like you're going to die doesn't mean that you have to live irresponsibly, because you might not die too. Because like you're as likely to live in the next second. You're more likely to live, but you could die. So it's important to acknowledge death. It's important not to be afraid of it. It's important to let death change you. When someone leaves your life, let that completely change you. Let that awaken every moment in your life when you have taken shit and it's not been worth it. We take shit because it's worth it a lot. I'm a social worker. There's a lot of shit I take and it's worth it. But I have so little tolerance for bullshit that is not worth it. Bullshit that pays no dividends. Because what are you doing if it's got no purpose? If it's got no purpose, you shouldn't be at it. If the purpose could be to enjoy nothingness, but if the purpose is just to harm, it gotta go. So I invite you to reconsider your fears of the concepts of the devil and death. It doesn't mean that you view them as good things. It doesn't mean that you welcome them, but it means when they come and when they're there, you can acknowledge them, not be disempowered by them, and move past them, and ultimately be a little more free. So that's just me rambling on, waiting for my scrambled egg bake to be done. Peace out. Thank you. If you have watched this far and you've not grown bored of my voice, please feel free to engage with me. Like I'm really big for responding in the internet. So, but at the same time, if you listen so much right now, you're probably bored. So that's okay. Thank you.